People's Radio United.
And I wanted to mention this too. We're in the middle of this situation at Standing Rock is god awful, and we all know it. But we're in the middle of a time period where a lot of people are stepping up to speak out, against the Trump agenda, against police brutality and misconduct and the murder of largely African-American men by police, things like that. The people are stepping up all kinds of ways. And of course, Standing Rock and all kinds of other ways. And what's happening now, we talk about what's happening in Standing Rock. It's kind of like a microcosm of what's happening all over the country right now, because legislators all over the country are looking at legislation to really criminalize dissent, to encourage people to hurt protesters. I mean, in North Dakota, they wanted to pass a law, and they're still working on it, pass a law to make it okay to run over protesters if they're in the street. I mean, you cannot make this stuff up. Why would you have a law? They're all good at talking about public safety, blah, 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 but they want to have a law that would make it okay to run over protesters, to drive into them, knock them down and run them over. I mean, are you kidding me? Mm-hmm. Why is this acceptable, in any kind of a, civilized society? Our own Minnesota legislature, we have 7 different laws that basically criminalize dissent of any kind. I was at the Capitol yesterday testifying against 4 of these laws that would basically make it a gross misdemeanor where you would go to prison for a year and $3,000 fine for blocking a road of any kind. And we take the streets all the time. When you have, we had a protest here on immigrant rights and against the Muslim travel ban that brought out 15,000 people. And we took the streets of Minneapolis, downtown Minneapolis, for a couple hours because we have 15,000 people. Guess what? They don't fit on a sidewalk, and things like that. And people are impassioned to take up these issues and feel like they want to get in the streets to do it. One of the things that they kept saying at the legislature yesterday was like, you can have your First Amendment rights, but not that way. It's like, well, what way? Come here and talk to you guys? You don't give a crap what we say. You don't listen to us. Coming here or going to some remote park in some place, one guy even said, get a permit for the park. Well, that's ridiculous. We should go to some park somewhere and talk to ourselves. No, we need to be in the streets. And when cops are running through the streets murdering people, we need to get in the highways and we need to do whatever we need to do to wake people up. And I'm sorry it's inconvenient for you. But let me tell you something. It doesn't even get close to comparing to the inconvenience, so-called, or of the underlying problem of what they've done to people by killing people and so forth. So, we're in there battling these things at the legislature with a bunch of idiots who, don't ever leave their house because they have no reason to complain about the system because the system works very well for them. Thank you very much. And so this kind of thing is happening all over the country where there's huge clampdowns on protesters, either by police actions themselves, as what we're seeing in Standing Rock, or by legislation that gives these police all the permission in the world to do all kinds of bad things to protesters, or even people that just don't like the message or the people or whatever. And this is a lot, like I said, coming after, the police accountability activists, that we're the kind of the main targets of it, but also anybody that steps up around the Trump agenda or anything like this. Our legislature, like I said, these bills, one of them made airports, like it's illegal to do a protest at an airport. Hello, the airport's public property. We paid for it. And now it's illegal. They're making it. And this would have, like, if this had been law, last year or a few months ago or whatever, all the protests like that we've had at our airport here about the Muslim ban would have all been illegal. So they're doing all kinds of things to try to make it as hard as possible or as painful as possible to protest. They're trying to chill people's rights to do it. It's horrific, and people really have to step up. Legislation makes you want to just like fall asleep when you hear that, right? And going and paying attention to these people and anything of what they're doing. But if we don't do it now, it's one way we have to stand up for the right to dissent in this country. And believe me, we sure as hell need to be dissenting in this country right now.
Well, I'm glad you touched on the whole thing of go protest in a park, and how that's just talking to ourselves because, they want us to protest in parks. They want protesters to do what protesters were doing before protesters took to the street. And they say the reason why is, public safety, whatever. No, the reason why, I'm going to call bullshit on all this right now. The reason why they do not want protesters in the streets, they want protesters protesting like they did before, is because that obviously didn't work. People are like, well, why weren't black people protesting about things earlier? They were. You just didn't notice, because they were doing it in very eloquent, awesome ways in places where you didn't see them, and I mean, that's what it's about. It's about demeaning protests back into something that isn't very effective, because this stuff with the roadways, it's getting attention, it's getting noticed, and we can't have that. And that's what this really is about. And anybody who says, well, you can have a right to protest, I'm just concerned about, the streets and emergency vehicles getting through. That's bullshit, okay? I've been at protests where I have seen emergency vehicles allowed to pass through.
We always allow them to pass. It's ridiculous to even bring that up as a point. Here's the thing. People have always wanted to have protests in ways that were visible and effective. Back in the civil rights era, there were multiple efforts to try to get at the issues that were going on and trying to really do this in a way that was very, very public. So back in March of 65, for example, people tried to march from Selma to Montgomery. And when they got to the Edmund Pettus Bridge, a bunch of brutal cops wielded billy clubs and tear gas and all kinds of things at these people and attacked them viciously and drove them back. Then they tried a second attempt about a week later and got pushed back again. Finally, they went to the federal courts and they asked, they sought a court order allowing them to get to start their march, in Selma, cross the Edmund Pettus Bridge and go to Montgomery. And when they started, when they went in to get the court order, federal district judge Frank M. Johnson, he weighed the so-called right of mobility against the right to march, and he ruled in favor of the demonstrators. He stated, quote, "The law is clear that the right to petition one's government for the redress of grievances may be exercised in large groups, and these rights may be exercised by marching even along public highways." So he said that this kind of conduct is okay. Blocking highways, it's part of the deal. Listen, I mean, people always like to talk about, they like to, kind of romanticize the good old days. The Boston Tea Party was an incident that involved destruction of property, some corporation's property, okay, and a blocking of a public waterway, which is one of the things that they put into this bill that I was at the House and Senate testifying against yesterday. These things, if those laws would have been in effect back then, people would have gotten, again, imprisoned for a year and charged the functional equivalent of $3,000, which is insane. The reality is this: what you're saying is right, Steve. Popular tactics, okay, they don't work. These other tactics, they're not popular, but they do work. They actually bring about change. As a result of all those marches, the Civil Rights Act of 1965 was passed. So, I'm telling you, you got to be visible. And if you're not visible, it's useless. The legislature would like you to sit in your house and send emails and do, online activism for whatever the hell that is, and send letters and go and speak nicely at their little, hearings and all of this other crap. And none of that actually produces any type of change whatsoever. So,
they want to keep us talking. They want to keep us talking, so we're not doing. It's if they keep us talking, we're never going to get anything done. So they're trying to keep us talking to them.
Well, talking really more to ourselves than anybody, because if you're in a park and 9 people go there with you, whatever, what do? You have to be where people can see you. You have to take the streets. You have to make it uncomfortable for people. You have to say that business as usual is not going to go today. And we changed it up, folks.
Well, I'm glad you touched on the civil rights movement in Selma, and because I saw this on Facebook this morning, and the cognitive dissonance that must be in this person's brain just blows my mind. They basically said, that people should be protesting like Martin Luther King did, because Martin Luther King did it the right way. And these people, Selma, they walked down the highway. The whole highway was blocked all the way to the state capitol. The highway they walked on the highway. This was done by Martin Luther King. And these people, I'm getting so tired of white people who don't know jack shit about Martin Luther King and the civil rights struggle, trying to tell black people and their allies, you need to protest like Martin Luther King because yada, yada, and you should protest like this. It's like, really? And I could spend an hour unpacking that, but we do have that we need to talk about.
That's a whole deal. Because one of the things that Martin Luther King himself acknowledged is that he wouldn't have been able to get anything done had there not been a Malcolm X. So there's a whole bunch to get unpacked around that. But, that's the whole thing. But the bottom line is that these, the legislators all over the country, I mean, there's at least, I think it's 18 states now that have laws before their legislatures to make it basically to deeply criminalize protest. And these things have to be stopped and challenged. Our own governor here is like, I just don't think that's the right way to protest, blah, blah, blah. Well, who the hell are you to tell us how to protest? We're protesting you. The point of protest is to protest the government. The government don't get to tell us how to protest them. That's the ridiculousness of that.
Right. So we've got this legislation, they're working on passing all of this legislation, and you've gone and testified at hearings where these things are happening, and people should turn out there for sure. But what else can people do to oppose this legislation? Like how would you recommend, like, the average person listening who doesn't get a chance to go speak before Congress, or what should they do that would be helpful, do you think?
Well, they can do some of the things that will no doubt, may or may not be effective, which is, they can, like in our case, our governor's already said that once this bill comes through, he's going to sign it into law because you people shouldn't be protesting that way anyway, type thing. So, people are going to be sending letters, calling and so forth and raising hell. We ought to, in my opinion, be showing up at the governor's mansion and raising hell, not letting his car out the driveway. That'd be a good thing. Things like that. But I don't want us to stop there. Part of it for me is do the activities that they're trying to make illegal. Do those activities. Do them, first of all, while they're still legal, but also do them because it's necessary to show people why these tactics are necessary. We also have to be willing to talk about why these tactics are necessary and not be embarrassed about it. There's one of the things is like the government always, and it's really in their interest, it always tries to set up this dynamic of like bad protesters and good protesters. There might be some tactics that are worse than others. I mean, I can say for sure one of the tactics that's worse than others is sitting in the legislature and expecting any good results, but,
right.
Basically, there you go, right? But the reality is, we can discuss among ourselves as movement people the efficacy of certain tactics or whatever, but we never allow the media, the police, government agents, any of these people to define for us what are acceptable tactics. We never do it.